Richard Turn is one of the world-leading experts on China's digital yuan. His views on CBDC and China's influential role in technology and macro trends are widely sought after by international media. Richard delivers a gritty, hard-hitting commentary that avoids jargon and speaks to a diverse audience. He is the author of many books and articles, including his latest best-selling books, Cashless and Digital Transformation from Within, which was well received around the world. The following is my conversation with Richard. Good to see you back here with us here, Richard. I was so excited to have you here.
David, it's absolutely my pleasure. And hello to everybody out there in YouTube and podcast land.
I know.
Thank you so much for listening in. And fire away. I can't wait. These are really important questions that we're gonna talk about today.
Indeed. Well, we wanted to let our viewers know that it's been almost a year since we last time spoke in an interview setting like this, and that's why I was like, I gotta reach out to Rick and have him come back. So everybody in the team was so excited. So, well, we're gonna get into. We got a lot to cover, and given your expertise and all this, so we look forward to this. So let me start first, Rick, by just talking in a general term. And what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is, for example, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and so forth. But it's not about the conflict. It's not about geopolitics. It's about the financial aspects of it. And what do I mean by this? We are noticing that a lot of countries are moving away from the US dollar. How do you read the global financial landscape given this ongoing conflict?
Oh, absolutely. Look, so let's start with a disclaimer. I am disgusted with the war in the Ukraine, and I do not, of course, support an invasion of a sovereign nation. So let's start with that disclaimer. But at the same time, we would all be remiss or poor if we do not recognize what are the implications of the war and, of course, of the sanctions that are accompanying the war. So let's just bring everybody level set, get everybody's same spot. About within a week or two after the invasion, the United States launched broad sanctions on Russia. And these sanctions were unique because they froze out Russia from the international banking system, which is predominantly the transfer of money via what's called the SWIFT network. And Russia had to go it on its own. Now, the reality is the sanctions were sold as shock and awe. And the reality has been somewhat different. And I argue, and others argue differently, just to be clear, that the sanctions aren't really working as advertised. They're not exactly shock and awe. And the reason is not just, quote, sanction violations. The sanctions, in fact, have huge holes in them that allow for Europe to continue to buy oil and gas from Russia. So there's very much legal transfer of cash into Russia. And then there are what I would call loopholes. For example, the purchase of oil and gas by India, Pakistan, China are not part of the sanctions. And they're not. It was sort of a gray area at first, but there's certainly ample money going into Russia to fund the war. Now, again, I'm not saying this is good or bad. I am simply stating the reality of the situation on the ground. So what we see is flow of money into Russia through what I would call loopholes or gray areas in the sanctions, and a change. Instead of using US dollars for this trade, Russia is now switching to use Chinese yuan for most of its business obviously with China, but also we're starting to see other counterparties like India and Pakistan start to revalue their energy purchases into Chinese yuan. So we're starting to see a migration into yuan. Now, let me make another disclaimer.
Mm-hmm.
For everybody out there who's listening to this, and we're talking about the general concept of de-dollarization, this is a slow process. Don't expect this to be anything overnight. Now, that cuts in two ways, in the sense that those watching from afar who are not really plugged into this are saying, well, nothing is happening. And you're right. If you look at dollar trade balances, dollar trade statistics, the impact of Russia buying, or India or Pakistan buying some oil in RMB, is a small, tiny scratch, or not even a dent, if you want to make, car crash comparison to the US dollar use. But, just because the impact is small doesn't mean you could ignore it. And I think that's a good place to hand it over to you.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I mean, you're absolutely correct, because here is the truth that most people do not even know, let alone that Western media or governments will disclose that. Is that, like you stated, Rick, is that Europe still purchasing Russian energy fuel and nuclear fuel, as a matter of fact. So other countries now, I just find out that North Africa, mainly two countries, Morocco and Algeria, are purchasing the diesel from Russia, okay, adding some product into it so it can be sanctions approved, per se. So which means they can go ahead, turn around and resell it to Europe at a 5 or 6 times the amount. Saudi's doing it.
Yes. Okay, so look, we had experience in 2012 when we put sanctions on Iran.
On Iran, yes.
So Iran quickly evaded the sanctions, and one of the things they would do is take an Iranian tanker, put it in the middle of the sea, drive up another tanker next to it, transfer the cargo, right? So now you have oil in a Turkish NATO country tanker or other nation tanker, which is not flagged for Iran, and then they go sell the oil. So, the sanctions evasion are not new. It's an old business. And in fact, China is buying oil from Russia, and this is not a sanctioned activity, so it's 100% legal. And they're buying tons more oil from Russia than they had before. And what's ironic is that they're taking the oil, they're refining it into diesel and or other products, and you know where they sell it? To the US, to Europe. Yeah. They sell it all over the world. And so, it's just, it's a sad
it is sad
part of the sanctions business, that sanctions are very hard to impose when you are looking at a large country like Russia that is so ingrained into the global economy, whether it's for the sale of wheat and food products into Northern Africa, which are key to their survival, or oil, which is huge on oil markets, or strategic metals, which are key to I can't remember which one, I forgot now, molybdenum, I'm not sure, which is key to the Brazil's aerospace industry. So, you can't, so the concept that you're going to take Russia and simply cut it off from the entire global economy is simply not going to happen, because they are a vital part of too many economies to ignore. So, so the shock and awe sanctions.
Germany, for example, is finding that out. I mean, the big concern, I have family lives in Europe, so I some of them in Germany, and we talk. They are telling me that is the European citizens are the one paying the price. It's not the leadership and so forth. So the policies they embarked on are failing. They have been failing since the get-go. So it's the average citizen that end up paying the price. And I quite don't understand what's leading them to embark on such things. So
So and that's, look, that is the fundamental problem with sanctions on a bigger picture, which is sanctions are blunt trauma instruments. And what you find is that the sanctions now have caused government destabilization in Sri Lanka, food scares and shortages throughout the throughout all of North Africa, which is dependent on Russian and Ukrainian wheat exports.
Yeah.
So, yeah, at the end of the day, Putin and his friends appear stable or stable enough, but the real people paying the price of sanctions are always the small guys. And, that's something that we really have to be conscious of, is the damage that these sanctions have caused within smaller, less developed nations. And, and thus their desire for de-dollarization. And
you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct, Rick. So that leads me to just to tackle back one particular point you talked about, when, for example, the bilateral trade in energy, in this case between Russia and China, is conducted in their respective currencies, the yuan and the rubles. Same thing with India, between India and Russia, in rupees and rubles. Now, I even find out just 3 days ago that Iraq has now dropped the US dollar from the bilateral trade between China and Iraq and adopting the Chinese yuan. So my question to you is this, Rick: is this an indication that we're going to be seeing the Chinese yuan becoming a global reserve currency? Does China wants to have its currency becoming the global reserve currency?
So I'll give you a real short answer to that and then explain. And the answer is no, not yet. And the reason is that being a reserve currency is expensive to maintain. And two, the Chinese yuan has a long way to go to developing. Now, ready? Here's the caveat. I do believe that the Chinese yuan can become a regional reserve currency. Now, now you say, what's the difference?
Yeah.
Well, basically within the region, within ASEAN nations, within Belt and Road countries, within certain trade regions or geographic regions, I think we're going to look at the Chinese yuan becoming very much a regional reserve or an important currency within these regions. I don't, here's the reality of the dollar hegemony. The dollar is used in stocks, in bonds, in investment contracts. It's used in so many ways beyond just buying containers of products that you're not going to eliminate the dollar. So those who say, well, dollar is stable, the dollar is unchallenged, and nothing is going to happen to the dollar, I get it. From their perspective, they're saying, well, look, the dollar use is so great that, if Iraq doesn't buy in using dollars, we don't care. Yeah. And, that's like saying your gas tank of your car has a leak in it. But because the leak is small, we're going to ignore the dangerous gasoline leaking out. So yes, Iraq switching over to yuan matters. Russia switching over to yuan-based trade matters.
Saudi
India,
Arabia,
Pakistan, all of these, what many would consider slow leaks, matter. And many who are traditionalists and believe in dollar primacy will say those leaks are too small relative to the total use of the dollar to matter. And strictly from a statistical point, they might be right. But what they're not watching, and this is something I write about in my book, Cashless, which is over my shoulder, is that really you have to look at the dollar's use in trade corridors, which is the physical trade between China or whatever pair of country pairs you come up with. And if you're looking at China specifically, what you're seeing already is a migration to paying for trade with China in RMB or yuan. And that's happening with Belt and Road countries, within neighboring countries in Asia who are part of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Program, RCEP countries.
Mm-hmm.
And what you see is, it's this slow leak. It's trade by trade, transaction by transaction. And some say, oh, it doesn't matter. We don't care about that. No.
No,
We
no.
care about this because it's not what happens today. It's what happens in 5 years and within 10 years. It is a slow migration that, again, is so slow that many people will deny that it is even happening. And that's what I fight against. And that's what I try to talk to people about. It's happening right now. And it was pushed or kicked off by sanctions. Now, you can argue whether I'm not saying that Russia is good. I'm not saying that all sanctions are bad, but I'm just trying to paint a picture of what is actually happening in the world right now. And I see the dollar primacy as ending, and the use of the RMB, the use of alternative currencies increasing, and the World Bank agrees. They look at the charts of dollar use and they've fallen. Okay, so it's not like what I'm saying is so radical that it's completely implausible.
Well, still, believe it or not, Rick, there are some in the West here. They don't like to hear this reality. It's a reality on the ground, but they kind of like, no, it can't be. The dollar will always be. I always challenged them by saying, we're not talking about this happening today or tomorrow. It's a process. It's going to take its course, but it will eventually happen. That's what we are referring to. Just for our viewers, by the way, if you get a chance to read Rick's book, Cashless, it's worth your time. And it has a wealth of information. I'm not just because Rick is a friend of mine and we're doing the interview. I'm saying it, and you guys know me by now. I don't sugarcoat things because I don't do that. But if you get a chance to read his book, it's worth your time. Trust me on this. So let's take on Rick.
Thank you so much, David. That's very kind of you. I really do appreciate it.
I stand for the truth, Rick, and you know this. So let's talk about one thing that I'm noticing, and I'm a student of history. I tend to really pay close attention to the trends over time. And one thing I want to talk to you about is, and get your insights on, of course, is the idea with the changes that's going on the global landscape. Some countries are now sort of increasing their gold reserves. What is the objective of this, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And, if you asked me a couple of years ago, do you think countries could ever use gold again as a currency?
We would say no.
I would say you're nuts.
It.
You're nuts. And it's really funny because there's two things that have happened. And, one is technology has changed with the advent of stable coins, and stable coins, which are a form of cryptocurrency, which are able to essentially take gold, put it into a digital slice, and you send the digital slice around. And of course, you need to sort of have faith that the gold is actually there, but we'll leave that for a moment. And yes, it's very true that both Russia and China in particular, has been buying tremendous amounts of gold. Now, for China's case, that started already many years ago. And it started because China felt vulnerable that they had just simply too many dollars. So they cut dollar purchases and they moved over to gold purchases, assuming that, if the Central Bank of China has too much dollar, we become dependent on dollars and are vulnerable to that. And that's factually true. You can't argue that. So the question is, once you have all this gold, what do you do with it? And there's sort of a really interesting project underway. And I look, again, for somebody out there who says these are pariah countries, we should not like them or we should not support them, the answer is we don't have to like them and we don't have to support them. This is simply reporting what they are doing.
Right.
And we can't get caught up in whether we like or dislike Russia or China, and I know that's these are politically charged countries right now, to understand and report on what is happening. So what is Russia and Iran doing? Two nations that are considered pariah states. I understand that, and I understand there's a large diversity of opinion on these nations. They are putting together a stable coin, which is gold backed. So here's the essential problem, and not new. Russia's currency goes up and down. The ruble has problems because of sanctions. Clearly, sanctions have had an impact. And of course, Iran is another sanctioned nation with a currency that nobody really wants. Okay, so the question is, who wants ruble and who wants Iran?
Real.
Real, thank you.
Real,
Pardon me. I lost it there. Thank you so much. So who wants these? In fact, Russia doesn't want real, and Iran probably doesn't want
ruble. That's true.
Doesn't want ruble.
That is true.
So what they're looking at now is, well, how do we make the flow of gold relatively easy? Now, 20 years ago, you had to fly airplanes loaded with gold back and forth, or put gold on ships to transport the gold. Now, what you can do is you can digitize the gold, put it in a monitored vault somewhere, right? And say, okay, we now have a Russian gold-backed stable coin or digital currency. And this digital currency, we will send back and forth digitally to Iran. And and we have X number of tons of gold in this particular vault that backs up this digital currency, and you can trade with it. Look, it's not really technically hard anymore. And that's what now look, this is a very interesting message. There are many listeners out there who may hate cryptocurrency. Others may love it. Cryptocurrency is a polarizing topic. It doesn't matter whether you love it or hate it. The reality is the technology that's used with cryptocurrency is already changing our world, and the Russians and the Iranians are going to use that technology. This didn't exist in 2012 when the U.S. put broad-based sanctions on Iran. They didn't have this tech to use, but they do now. So whether you like these countries or not is immaterial. They are trying to build technology that will allow them to both evade sanctions and conduct trade on their own terms. And whether it's a gold-backed coin, whether it's some other form of digital currency, doesn't really matter. What matters is they're trying. And what matters is that it's not just pariah nations like Iran and Russia. It's Brazil, it's South Africa, it's the entire BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa nations, and now we have BRICS Plus. So Egypt has joined in, and other countries are joining in. So what you've really got is a global South that is looking for solutions. And here's the real key message to everybody out there. Here, I'm going to put it in a way that maybe people can relate to. That's kind of funny. So the message is in the 1980s, people stopped buying Cadillacs. Cadillacs were considered the ultimate car, in the 70s, 60s. If you had a Cadillac, that said something, right? People stopped. They looked for alternatives, and Cadillac had to reinvent itself. But the point is, the dollar is like a Cadillac. Everybody wanted the dollar, but they started looking for alternatives. And for years, Cadillac, when the sales started to decline, they said, we don't have nothing to worry about because we're Cadillac. People want us, want this prestige automobile. And the dollar is in the same way, where people have started to look for alternatives. And that they are looking for alternatives is the problem. Because you can argue whether a gold-based Russian ruble or stable coin back and forth between Russia and Iran will work. Fine. You don't like that solution? Great.
Yeah.
They'll find another one. It's that they and other members of the global south are looking for solution alternatives. That is the problem. And so it's like the
Yeah.
death of the Cadillac franchise.
Yeah. Well, that also is like the reflection on the shifting in the global geopolitical order. In other words, we are moving from a unipolar to a multipolar setting, and countries will have to look after their own interests. That is basically what they're doing. And if I've learned anything when it comes down to geopolitics, I mean, I know, Rick, that there are some now on YouTube that calling themselves geopolitical analysts and all that without any background, without any credentials. So I usually tend to push back against individuals like that, because it's very important to understand what the dynamics of geopolitics are all about, to understand that the financial aspect is part of that shifting global order. And this is exactly what we are witnessing. The global south is doing, or the countries of the BRICS are doing, or even ASEAN thinking among themselves, or RACP and so forth. They are thinking of, like you said, alternatives. So for us, some of us here in the US, thinking the dollar will always be at the top. I mean, it's a reality they need to come to grip with. It will not be there forever. And we are starting to see the changes to that. Now,
look, let me interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
You just said the two key words that so far I haven't talked about, because this is the macro geopolitical issue, which is multipolarity. And we see a changing world right now from a post-World War II world where basically the dollar was king, the US economy was king, and we're seeing a world that is fundamentally changing. And it's changing to this multipolar world where other countries matter too. And that's sort of hard for the US to deal with. In fact, there's a great article in Foreign Policy magazine just last week.
I just read it. Rick.
U.S. being afraid of a multipolar world, and
you are right.
And that's really a change for the U.S., a change for the EU. But really, what you see is the global South, BRICS nations, all saying we matter too now, and you cannot make these unilateral decisions without consulting us. They impact us, and they're key. Now, the other thing that you said that's really interesting, and I want to just share my own experience with this, is I started out, really, I focus on geopolitics from a financial technology perspective. So my original background was a banker for 18 years, but I work in fintech, the intersection of finance and technology, which is why I wrote a book on China's central bank digital currency. But from the start of my voyage in life, if you will, I was always an international banker, so I always did some element of geopolitics. But really, my focus was more in the technology. But what happened is the technology and the geopolitics have come together. And that's what's really funny. So for those who don't know, I write on LinkedIn regularly. And occasionally I have people asking me on LinkedIn, well, why are you writing about geopolitics? You write about fintech.
They don't get it.
and I laugh, and my classic line is I say that fintech, financial technology, which means cryptocurrency, central bank digital currencies, stable coins. These are all what I call pawns in the great geopolitical game. And when they really came to be, which is 2015-14, nobody looked or thought about them as geopolitical pawns or part of the geopolitical landscape, but they are now. And, that's really a change in how we think about technology and its impact on geopolitics. So anyway,
What
I hope I didn't take you too far off course.
No. That is a good point, Rick, because that really will lead me to address the next theme in this conversation. And the one I want to talk to you about, and I am sure you are aware of, that certain countries in the West, Europe and here in the US mainly, but in the US, in the West, for example, the British, the UK central bank, they are launching the CBDC.
Yes.
The United States, as a matter of fact, most of us Americans here have no clue that the president has signed an executive order 14067. That executive order will give now the Feds, when I say Feds, is the Federal Reserve, the ability to digitize and control the financial aspects of. Now, where do you see the concern with that? Is this about the finances, or is it about controlling?
Okay, that's okay. That's a wonderful question, and let's launch into this. I want to make one slight correction.
Sure.
The Biden executive order gave no authority to the Federal Reserve or the U.S. Treasury to issue a central bank digital currency.
Okay.
And that's commonly misquoted. In fact, you see it all over that, oh, now we have a digital dollar. No, actually, the Congress has to authorize the Fed and the Treasury to work together to issue a digital dollar. So there is no digital dollar project. And I always say that the Fed and the US is a decade behind.
So why are they saying that? Why are they saying that?
Okay, so look, and for precisely the control issue that you bring up, there are a group of people who are violently opposed to the creation of a central bank digital currency. And I ask all fair-minded listeners out there that when you see an article that is virulently or radically opposed to central bank digital currency for the US or for the Europe, I ask you to look at the source of the article and ask yourself, is this article sponsored or selling you gold? Is the article selling you cryptocurrency? Or the final one, are they selling survival bunkers? Because the groups that are the most opposed to a central bank digital currency are, in fact, these groups, because they believe that crypto, gold, or the destruction of civilization, which requires you to have a survival bunker, they see central bank digital currency as the launch pad to this societal destruction, which couldn't be further from the truth. And their argument is always the same.
Yeah.
That a central bank digital currency will allow the government to control your money. It's a simple argument. It says, okay, the government is going to issue digital dollars, therefore they will control the digital dollars. And, you know, the argument is based on a misrepresentation and a misunderstanding of what digital money is about. So we have cryptocurrency, which people think is fairly anonymous. We can argue about the degree of anonymity at another time. But basically the technology for central bank digital currencies, whether it's China's, the proposed digital euro, or the proposed digital sterling, digital pound, they all come from this technology that basically allows you to have the same degree of privacy that you have now. Or let me say this again, that allows you to have the same degree or better privacy than you have now with credit cards. So number one, you won't have an account with the federal government, with the Federal Reserve. Number two, the Federal Reserve will not control the money that you have. Your relationship will be maintained with your bank. Your bank will be the person who issues you this digital currency. So yeah, it's in broad strokes, there are people who are very opposed to digital currency. And let me make it clear why you should want one. you should want a digital currency because U.S. listeners, the U.S. pays 2.3% of its GDP. All U.S. GDP, 2.3% goes to paying banks and other intermediaries for payments.
Wow.
So the concept of a CBDC that allows for free payment between entities is as a CBDC as a public good, a government public good, just like bridges and roads, is a fundamentally good thing. You should want it because every time you buy a coffee from your coffee shop and you swipe your card or tap your card or use your Google Pay or Apple Pay, your poor coffee shop vendor is paying merchant fees on the order of anywhere between 1% to 4%. It's crazy. So, we have a tax imposed on all citizens in the EU and the US from MasterCard, Visa, which are essentially how we make digital payment today. And that's a tax on all of humanity. So we should want to eliminate that tax and have free and open payment between me and you without a bank as an intermediary. Let's just leave it at there. There's a lot more I could say about this, but central bank digital currencies are a digital future that is fundamentally good. And when you see an article that's radically opposed to them, reasonable opposition, fine. Nobody argues that. We should ask the question, how private is it? How will it, what mechanism will it use? You should ask those questions. But virulent opposition, look to gold sales and crypto sales, and you'll find your answer as to why these articles are so virulently anti-CBDC.
Well, actually, Rick, I'd like you to explain a few things for our viewers.
Sure.
And what am I referring to? I'm referring to your posts and articles, and I read them, the ones on LinkedIn and the ones on Twitter. You and I are linking both platforms. And there's the last one that I took a look at. It has to do with the BISS, the Project Icebreaker.
Yes.
In which you talked about set the what you call it, the standard for the retail CBDC cross-border payments. I really would like you, if you won't mind, to just provide some brief explanation for our viewers, just to understand, because our viewers are scattered around the world. And for them, having this kind of information will be very useful into understanding what is the next step in their financial dealings as the US leadership is waning down and the dollar will eventually drop.
Okay, so let's look at a central bank digital currency future. One of the major benefits to central bank digital currency is that it will eventually allow for transfers of money from one country to the other without paying huge bank fees. That's fundamentally good. Anybody out there who's made an international transfer from their bank basically pays for it, and you pay SWIFT. And what's really sort of amusing is that the SWIFT system charges your bank some small amount, which is in US cents, and my bank marks it up to $40 each time I have to send one. Wow. And yes, there are fintechs now that make these transfers cheaper, but basically the central bank digital currency future that we're looking at, or CBDC future, is one where transfers between nations become fast, nearly immediate, and cheap, which is good for global trade everywhere, okay? That's generally hard to argue that that's not a positive thing. So how do we get there? How do we do it? Well, we're going to do it using specialized systems. Now, these systems are being built now, or being designed, I should say, they're being designed by an entity called the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, which is generally called the central bank to central bankers, right? So basically the BIS is an actual international bank. And what they do is they are concerned with macro scale policy issues. And that's what central bank digital currency is. So what they've done is they've done a tremendous amount of research to figure out how to connect CBDC systems. So I'm going to use these examples, and I know people may not like them, but Russia is on April 1st will start its central bank digital currency in testing, and China already has a central bank digital currency in testing, and India has a central bank digital currency in testing. Let's fast forward 1 year from now. We got India, Russia, China. They all have central bank digital currencies. How are we going to pass them around between one another? Okay, to make for this future good world of fast and immediate cheap transfers. Well, there's sort of two ways to do it in most basic terms. One is to have one currency talk directly to the other. In other words, that assumes that they use some similar technology, which is really not likely. In fact, all central bank digital currencies right now are being built on very different technologies to match the country's level of sophistication or their existing systems. But basically, there is no standard for central bank digital currency. So having one connect directly with the other is rather problematic. So you're left with option two. Option two is basically a platform run by, in this one case example, the BIS will start a group of, will start a new company run by central banks, and these central banks will run a platform that allows basically one central bank digital currency to enter the platform and be transferred to the other. Okay, so basically a third-party platform that allows for the immediate transfer of these central bank digital currencies. Now, the key part about this is that who's missing? Who didn't I talk about? And the answer is I didn't talk about SWIFT.
SWIFT, yeah.
All right, so those who are used to a SWIFT, we are currently in a SWIFT-based money transfer world. They have a monopoly on the system. That is changing, and digital currencies, the digital technology is fundamentally allowing for new means of transfer of digital cash that will not be on SWIFT. And now here we go, wait for it, will not be subject to the sanctions of SWIFT. So
the sanctions
it's a new world.
So the sanctions will become irrelevant, basically?
Absolutely. Look, you're looking at a world with central bank digital currencies and with stable coins and with other forms of digital currency transfer that are basically sanction resistant. And it's very, very hard for, and as we look to that future, we're going to go 10 years out, 15 years out.
Yeah.
The ability of the US or Europe to project sanctions on nations that it doesn't like, and some of these reasons it doesn't like them are certainly justifiable, but the ability to do that is ending. And digital currency and technology is changing our world in that way. Now, here's my complaint. There are two systems right now that are one is an active development that'll be launched in 2024. And the name for that is called CBDC. Not the greatest name, but anyway, M for multiple, CBDC, and that's in Hong Kong. And I'm not sure if I can get all of the 5 central banks that are involved, but the number 1 bank is China, number 2 is Hong Kong, Thailand, and I'm missing 2, and I apologize to
Singapore.
UAE, United Arab Emirates, and I'm missing 1, which is South Africa. I'm pretty sure 98% confidence in South Africa. But
interesting.
Look at those lists of 5 banks. Those are all global South countries.
Yeah.
And what you're really seeing is that China and the global south are the ones that are building out the new technology that will be used to transfer central bank digital currencies. Now, why is that important? Where is the United States on this list? It's nowhere.
Nowhere.
So the next time that I ask all fair-minded viewers to listen carefully, the next time that you hear Fed Chair Powell or other senior Federal Reserve governor say the following: there is no first mover advantage to creating a central bank digital currency. Ask yourself, do you think it's an advantage if you are the country like China that is now behind and or on the forefront of developing the transfer mechanism for global central bank digital currencies? Do you think that's an advantage? Do you think that's a first mover advantage? Yeah.
Interesting.
So this is nuts. It's really fascinating to watch this unfold. And we are living in times that are changing rapidly. And the US, which is renowned for its technological innovation, is now taking a back seat. And I'm sorry to say that in many of
it's the
these
truth.
innovations.
It's the reality. It's the reality, Rick. I mean, due to our failed fiscal policies, that's just the reality of it. So now, is this based on what you said? Is this why Africa now is testing this CBDC?
Absolutely.
I know they are going through some testing for it.
Yeah, sure. The first relatively large scale central bank digital currency was launched by the Bahamas. The number two was issued by Nigeria. It's called the e-Naira. So right now, if you look at Africa, there are 20, 30 countries all within Africa who are all examining central bank digital currencies. The countries that are noteworthy because they're advanced are, of course, Nigeria, which has already launched. I'll make no qualms about it. They launched a little too fast, and it's not very successful. In fact, they're doing a redesign now. Talk about that later if you'd like. But Ghana and South Africa, these are the three top leaders in the central bank digital currency race in Africa. And they're all looking at this for two primary reasons. One is to foster financial inclusion within their people, and particularly in South Africa's case, to make global monetary transfers cheaper, faster, and easier on a large scale. So selling minerals for South Africa to China or to wherever they can conduct this business with central bank digital currency, be completely sanctionless, and of course save money, which is big for governments. Governments like to save money, and they don't really like paying SWIFT, or nobody likes to pay SWIFT, or nobody likes to pay for international money transfer. But really, it's the concept that they can trade in their own currencies without having to use the dollar as an intermediary. So what you see typically happening in currency markets is that many commodities are all priced in dollars. So if you have Indonesia and South Africa, or China and South Africa, better example, right? And they're conducting trade, much of this trade has to be converted into dollars. That's expensive, and it's particularly expensive when interest rates have risen in the United States, making the dollar tremendously expensive for these nations. So if they can cut out the intermediary and not have to take that intermediary jump into US dollars, they can trade more effectively and more efficiently. And you can't blame them for wanting that. That's not an unreasonable expectation for them.
Especially, it's very bad for countries that have acquired the IMF loans with the interest rate going up now. They are in a hole. I mean, I can think of, for example, of Argentina. It's in a hole for $44 billion now. Now, speaking of Argentina, before I forget, what do you make out of Brazil and Argentina talking about creating a unified currency in Latin America by which to bypass the dollar altogether? Is that feasible?
Yeah. You see, yes, it's feasible. We don't know how. Look, I'm glad you brought that up because I was remiss in not bringing it up earlier. So far, we've talked about what many people out there would consider pariah nations, Iran. Some people call Russia a pariah. Some people, I don't think this is accurate, call China a pariah nation. I don't think that's a correct characterization, but we'll leave that.
Yeah.
But Argentina and Brazil are not exactly enemies of the United States. Okay, you're not going to say, well, Brazil, they are radically opposed to the U.S. or Argentina, they really hate America. No, neither one of these nations is fundamentally an enemy or an opponent to the U.S.
Yeah.
But what they're nations that want a better way to trade than having to go through US dollars. And that's the exact same example that I talked about a moment ago, where trade between these countries uses dollar as an intermediary. So Brazil and Argentina are investigating a new currency I think it's called the thew for South.
The thew, yeah.
Yeah, and the idea is basically for them to come up with some sort of currency union. Now look, there are many opponents who will point to the obvious problem, which is that the Argentinian peso is in hyperinflationary and it has real problems. And I'm not going to argue that. The bigger question is they're looking. And that goes back to my earlier statement. I understand that a currency union in traditional terms between Brazil and Argentina is not likely to take place. The currencies are mismatched, and obviously Argentina is the basket case of the two. However, with all the technology that we have today, can they come up with something different, something new? And the answer is, don't bet against them. And for them, there's look, for Brazil and Argentina, right now, and a high U.S. dollar and a high cost of using U.S. dollars as this currency intermediary, there's money being left on the table for them. So they look at some imaginary currency. It doesn't matter what technology it uses, but they look at this imaginary currency as saving them millions and millions, if not billions of dollars. All right? So for them, there is certainly incentive to try to find a solution. And even if that solution is not perhaps the most efficient or the most effective, maybe it's based on commodities prices. Argentina, it produces tremendous amounts of grain, of beef, other commodities that it exports. Maybe they don't base this thew just on the Argentinian peso or dollar. Peso. Anyway, but my point is only to say they are very creative. Counting out the creation of this Brazil-Argentinian currency based solely on the arguably defective Argentinian currency is wrong. And that's the reason is because they've got new technology that they're going to put to work, and they do have commodities and they do have other things that they can build into this currency. And that'll be a game changer. And it's all about not using dollars, and it's all about saving money. The dollar is very expensive to use right now.
Now, in your opinion, do you believe other Latin Americans will join? Sort of, they all will migrate to this new currency, including, and I'm going to go and say this, including Mexico. Do you think they will all go for it?
So I think that at this point, let's let Brazil and Argentina come up with some kind of solution
first
that would allow them to create a currency that is at least stable enough and usable within their sphere. And then let's just see if anybody else would want to join in. Because, look, I mean, I'm not making light of how difficult it is, the technical challenge that they have in finding something with the necessary stability and the necessary non-inflationary properties that would work for them. So the answer is, let's see what these two nations come up with. And then if they actually come up with something that's suitable, then I guarantee you that the rest of South America, pardon me, would be very interested in this. And yes, countries like Mexico, Uruguay, and others would say, "Hey, you got something that makes it cheaper to trade within our region?" Because there are, you see, the thing that's hard for people who are U.S. bound or EU bound, was hard for them to understand is that there's a thriving trade between these South American countries. And that is being hindered by dollar use, not helped at this point. Now, many years ago, you could say, well, the dollar was stable. The dollar was the yardstick or the global standard for trade, and that was true. But now the expense of using the dollar makes them try to seek another method. And you can't really blame them for trying that because the dollar is hindering their regional trade.
That's for sure. I mean, I do see that path being paved now forward. It's going to take time. There is no doubt about it. I mean, we all know it's reality. But let me tackle one more topic here before I let you go, Rick. And
Sure.
it has to do with the EU, the European Union. It has been some conversations, and I talk to people in Europe sometimes. It has been some conversations that some countries within the EU wanted sort of to have the ability, while they're still part of the euro, they want to almost go back to their original currency. And this is exactly what Lula of Brazil said about this new currency in Latin America. But as long as countries keep their own currencies, where do you see the euro moving forward, given the turmoil that's going on?
Look, I see no instability to the euro, and it's Italy. You may not know this, but my family is from Italy. I'm very close. I go all the time. I speak Italian. The recent president of Italy, as has the last president, made some discussion of that Italy was treated unfairly when it entered the euro, which some of the arguments are true, and that Italy would like to exit, and none of that was taken too seriously. It did shock the Brussels management. I don't see any of the Eurozone countries really mounting a serious challenge to leaving Eurozone. So I just don't see it. Could it happen? Yeah. I mean, whoever thought we were going to see a major European war? Who? Yeah. So so anybody who says the Eurozone and the euro currency are forever stable, cast in stone. Well, no, nobody can say that anymore. But at least in the medium to 10-year out future, I don't see Italy leaving, despite their some of their politicians' rhetoric that they might like to. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, but we could. Well, will it be fair to say we could at least on the economic front elsewhere, like the rise of BRICS, if once it becomes BRICS plus, they will have some sort of economic presence on the global stage that could rival that of the EU. I mean, for now.
That is absolutely. And look, what you see, look, one of the things that readers or listeners have to be really aware of is that the European Central Bank is hard at work at designing and building a privacy protecting central bank digital currency. And one of the reasons that the Eurozone is looking to do this, they're twofold or threefold, just make it a little more complicated. One is central bank digital currency as the alternative to cryptocurrency. Fine, forget about that one. But number 2 and 3, which are critical, Eurozone has no means of transferring money back and forth electronically other than Visa and MasterCard, which are US-owned companies. And the third one is the Eurozone sees the digital euro as a way to counter dollar influence. So one of the things that is related to your first question is, do not think that the Eurozone will march in lockstep with the US and the UK forever. That isn't going to happen. Now, and what you see with the emphasis on building the digital euro is basically the Eurozone, and they admitted this, they didn't use these terms. They did say that it was important vis-a-vis the dollar and the Visa and MasterCard systems. But what I call it is it's an insurance policy for them in the future over sanctions, over some major disagreement with the US. And anybody listening who says, oh, well, we don't have those kinds of disagreements. Oh, you sure do. You already have them. At the beginning of COVID, the Trump administration denied humanitarian aid into Iran. And the Europeans used what had since been closed, but it was essentially a barter system called Instex. Doesn't matter. But the Europeans sent humanitarian aid to Iran, and Iran paid for it using this alternative currency system, or alternative currency transfer system. So my point is to say, the concept that the US, UK axis, if you will, these very tightly knit countries are going to be in perpetual agreement with the Eurozone is not reasonable to assume. There's an example where it's already been shown not to be happening. And the digital euro for them is an insurance policy that lets them conduct some form of cash transfer or monetary transfer outside of their zone without SWIFT or without anybody else. And that's the new reality. That's how geopolitics and technology are coming together. And they're going to change our world in the long term. I'm going to close with how I started. Don't look at this as something that's going to happen immediately. Look at this as a very long-term change, and that's why it will be very easy for many to deny that it is even happening.
Yeah. Well, here you have it, folks. This is the insights from Rick that you will not find anywhere else. By the way, Rick, if our viewers wants to, where can they find you?
Sure. Thanks for everybody who's listened in. And you can get me on LinkedIn, where I post daily, and on Twitter, where I'm there daily. You can also go to my website, Turrin.com, where I've got all of my latest videos and writing and all that stuff. I have a newsletter on Substack. So there's LinkedIn, Twitter, Substack. I've got so many ways to get in touch with me. It's crazy, but I would love to hear from you. If you disagree, let me know. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are. If you agree with me, write me a letter. Tell me what you think. There's plenty of ways to reach out. I'm highly accessible.
Well, we do have a very engaging audience. I truly learn a lot from our viewers because that's the community we've created. So it's kind of, I'm sure they will, they'll find this very, very insightful. And
David, let me cut you off. You have a wonderful community here. And the last time I did a podcast or YouTube video with you and said the same thing, more people from your group wrote me than on any other podcast that I've done. They are engaged and switched on. And thank you so much to all of you who wrote last time. And I love to hear from you again. But that's testimony to you and what you've done to create a wonderful community. And I congratulate you for doing that.
Well, thank you to that. And thanks to the entire team. So just for our viewers, I will make sure I'll post the links for Richard, where you can get in touch with him in addition to what he said. So I am with him on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and so forth, but I will post all the links for you in the description. So, well, Rick, I can't thank you enough on behalf of the entire team for carving out time for us. I know how busy you are, and it truly, truly means a lot to me personally, because I learn from you when I have this kind of conversations. And to our viewers, I hope you find those insights from Richard very, very useful to you, and I am sure it will be very useful to you. As always, prepare yourself for a challenging world order. Till next time, guys. Bye-bye.